Beneath the remains of this deserted North Yorkshire village, archaeologists recently made a discovery. Human bones, burned and broken. Corpses mutilated to stop them from rising again. And there's only one reason that happened. Because the communities that lived here, they lived in fear, in terror that those they'd laid to rest would come back again. This village to most in the textbooks is known as Wharram Percy. But to those in the know, it's the real village of the Walking Dead. This, my spooky friends, is the season of the dead, a journey through Britain's darkest places, as All Hallows Eve draws near, and the veil between the living and the dead trembles. Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Claire. This is The Wanderlust Way. Firstly, let me say a huge thank you to everybody that supports this channel by liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing, sending super thanks, becoming members. Honestly, everything that you do helps this channel to grow and it allows me to continue with adventures like this and share the stories that I find with you. Okay, so today is our episode 2 in the season of the dead, weekly treats in the run up to Halloween. Last week we looked at a church that was said to be cursed by the devil himself. This week we're looking at something even more terrifying. The thought that what if the dead could rise again? It's been the subject of many horror stories along the lines from Dracula to The Walking Dead. But today we're here to hear a real life story that happened actually in Britain. We're also going to compare that to some of the stories that have happened across Europe, stories of revenants and vampires. So if you're not scared enough already, stay tuned, grab yourself a pillow to hide behind, because that's enough waffle. Let's wander. Wharram Percy sits on the western edge of the chalk walls of North Yorkshire. Today it's a scattering of grassy humps and old foundations, but for 6 centuries it was a living, breathing village. Possibly founded in the 9th or 10th century, it grew into a thriving community. Families farming the land, worshipping in their church, and burying generations of ancestors in the soil beneath their feet. By the 16th century, Wharram Percy was abandoned, its people gone and its homes left to crumble. All that remains standing now is the ruined church of St. Martin, the last medieval building still watching over this empty place. Out of around 3,000 deserted medieval villages that are scattered across Britain, Wharram Percy is perhaps the most famous. Now, what they found here, what the archaeologists discovered in the mid-20th century, it shocked the historians. They were hoping to find pottery or remains of medieval life, but what they actually found was human bones, men, women and children. And these weren't just normal bones on consecrated ground. They'd been hacked apart, they'd been scorned by fire, and they'd been discarded together in burial pits, scattered amongst the old houses. Close analysis revealed knife marks on skulls and vertebrae, suggesting decapitation. Limbs had been smashed with heavy blows. Many of the bones were charred. Historic England considered alternative explanations, even the desperate act of cannibalism during famine, but the cuts didn't match those patterns. In the end, the most plausible conclusion was also the most chilling. For a time, the people of Wharram Percy lived in terror of their own dead. They feared the corpses of their neighbours, perhaps even their family, might claw their way back from the grave, and so they mutilated the bodies to make sure that they stayed buried. Wharram Percy was not alone in its fear. In the long, dark nights of the Middle Ages, the rumours started to spread that corpses were refusing to lie still. They called them revenants, the restless dead. It was said that those who had lived with cruelty in their hearts, or who had died shrouded in grudges and sin, might not find peace in the grave. Instead, a malevolent force clung to their flesh, and their bodies rose again to trouble the living. They brought with them the smell of decay, the weight of sickness, and a terror that spread through whole villages like a plague. The chronicler William of Newburgh wrote of such horrors with chilling clarity. He tells of a man in Buckinghamshire who went to his grave with many sins unshriven. Not long after, villagers swore they saw his bloated corpse lurching through the lanes at night, eyes burning red in the darkness, his presence fouling the air with a dreadful stench. Fear grew so great that the grave was opened. There, as fresh as though he had only just drawn breath, lay the swollen body. The villagers dragged it from the earth, cut off the head, tore out the heart, and cast it into the fire. Only then, it was said, did the haunting cease. There is another story from Yorkshire of a wealthy landowner, notorious in life for being cruel. Now, when he died, he was buried. But he didn't stay buried for long, because the villagers said that he came to them in the night, that he would slip into their bedrooms and press on their chests as they slept. By the morning, they woke up feeling breathless and weak. Fear spread until the villagers could take no more. They exhumed his body, finding it swollen and blood-filled, a sign they believed that it had been feeding on the living. Once again, the remedy was savage. The corpse was cut open, its heart ripped from the chest and burned. Only then, once again, did the terror come to an end. For centuries, stories like this existed only in ink, half dismissed as medieval superstition. But what they found in the ground here at Wharram Percy confirmed it. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of at least 10 individuals, 137 bones in all, dating between the 11th and 14th centuries. They bore the same signs of violence described in those medieval chronicles. Skulls hacked apart, vertebrae scarred with knife marks, long bones smashed, many of the fragments scorched by fire. For the first time, the written terrors of the chroniclers were matched by hard proof in the earth. The Wharram Percy bones stand as the first archaeological evidence in England that villagers may have mutilated their own dead to prevent them from rising. So, what would a medieval wise person tell a terrified villager to do if they suspected that one of their neighbours was walking from their grave at night? Well, 3 easy steps. Step 1, dig them up. Yes, really, it's pretty important that they dig them up. Step number 2, dismember them. Yes, don't forget the dismembering part, that is pretty important. Step number 3, create a huge bonfire and try to burn as much as you possibly can. And step 4, there wasn't technically a step 4 on record, but I'd suggest step 4 might look something like: make sure that everybody else in the villages agrees that the person was a revenant, or be prepared for some very awkward conversations at the next village gathering, because let's face it, nobody wants to be told that their grandfather was a monster. On a serious note, it does sound absolutely barbaric, but we must be careful not to sneer at these people, because they lived in genuine fear with limited explanations. These rituals tell us something very important. They tell us that when a community is in fear, they will do absolutely whatever it takes to protect themselves. England had its revenants, the swollen, wandering corpses that terrified villages like Wharram Percy. But across Europe, the fear of the restless dead took on an even more sinister form. In the forests of Romania and the mountains of Serbia, they spoke of the strigoi and the vampire. These beings were not merely the dead returned to walk among us. They were thought to feed, to drain the life of the living, leaving only sickness, weakness, and death in their wake. Unlike the elegant creatures of modern fiction, these were grotesque creatures, shabby peasants in death as they had been in life, sometimes bloated, sometimes pale, with blood caked at the lips. They were hideous reminders of the grave, not romantic figures of Gothic poetry. By the early 18th century, fear of these creatures had reached a fever pitch. Now, by this point, villagers were speaking of shadows in windows, of corpses being too fresh, and of villagers becoming weak unexpectedly. Now, there were 2 cases that extended further than the Balkans that reached the courts of Europe. In 1725, in the Serbian village of Kisilova, a farmer named Peter Pogojevic was laid to rest, yet within days terror gripped the settlement. 10 villagers died suddenly, each claiming on their deathbed to have been throttled by the dead farmer. Some swore they had seen him wandering after dark, others said he had come to their door to demand food. When the grave was opened, officials reported the corpse was perfectly preserved, with new growth of hair and nails, and fresh blood smeared about the mouth. Fearing the worst, the villagers drove a stake through his chest before consigning him to the flames. Only a few years later came the case of Arnold Payol, a soldier in Hungary who had once confessed to being attacked by a vampire and claimed to have smeared himself with its blood to protect against infection. When Payol died in an accident, villagers believed he too rose from the grave to prey on the living. Fear spread so fast that the authorities themselves became involved. His corpse, they reported, was found blood-filled and undecayed. Payol was staked, burned and buried again. But even then, the panic would not die. Reports of these vampire outbreaks spread across Europe. They were recorded in official documents and spread out in sensational pamphlets. And they are the reason that the word vampire reached the languages of the West. These tales shaped Europe's darkest nightmares, and though centuries have passed, the shadow of the vampire still lingers. If you are interested in the topic of real vampires, not some of these Hollywood stories, then I can highly recommend reading this book, which is by Richard Sugg. Now, it's got lots of stories, but one of the things I find quite fascinating is the fear that it talks of, because this fear is still evident. It's still happening in remote parts of Eastern Europe, where people are truly believing that there are revenants walking among them, and for that reason they still exhume bodies and dismember them and things like that. So if you want to know more, this is a great book to start with. Have you read it, by the way? Let me know in the comments if you've read it. Now, on another note, if you haven't read the book, here is another question for you. When you first think of the word vampire, what comes to mind first, or who comes to mind? Is it Christopher Lee, perhaps, from Dracula? Is it maybe Tom Cruise from Interview with the Vampire? Or even Kiefer Sutherland from The Lost Boys? Let me know in the comments. The fear of the restless dead left more than just stories. Like here at Wharram Percy and across Europe, graves themselves bear witness to how far people were willing to go to keep their dead from walking. In Poland, archaeologists uncovered skeletons buried with iron sickles laid across their throats, a blade poised to sever the head should the corpse attempt to rise. In Bulgaria, bodies have been found with iron stakes driven through the chest, pinning them to the soil. In Venice, plague pits revealed skeletons with bricks jammed between their teeth, a grotesque attempt to stop them from biting from beyond the grave. Each find is a silent echo of communal dread, a ritual of control in a world where disease and death were ever present. These were not quiet, private acts. To drag a body from the grave, to mutilate it before the eyes of your neighbours, was as much performance as precaution. It told the village, we are doing something. We are taking back control. We are keeping the dead in their place. In their desperation, these rituals became a kind of theatre of survival. But perhaps one of the most chilling questions of all is, what if some of those bodies were not dead at all? In an age without modern medicine, it was not uncommon for people in deep comas or seizures to be mistaken for dead. A faint heartbeat, shallow breathing, a rigid body, enough for a terrified family to believe the spirit had fled. But the real horror to this story is that once a person was declared dead, they were, in the eyes of the community, dead, and nothing that they were going to be seeing was going to change their mind on that. So in some cases, people might have been in a deep coma or asleep, and they were said they were dead. When they weren't dead, they were classed as a revenant, and therefore they were fair game to be staked, dismembered or burned. Richard Suggs' work recounts cases where this nightmare became reality. Tales of villagers carrying a coffin to the grave, only to hear scratching and muffled cries within. But can you imagine the terror? I mean, what exactly would you do? So you wake up, you're in your coffin. Do you bang on the lid and let everybody know, your family and friends, that you are still alive? Hooray! No, because if you do that, they're going to think you're a restless revenant, and then they're going to kill you anyway. By the mid-1700s, the vampire panics had reached such fever that they could no longer be ignored. Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, disturbed by reports of villagers tearing open graves, dispatched her court physician to investigate. His conclusion was blunt. There was no evidence of vampires, only superstition feeding on fear and the natural signs of decay. In 1755, Maria Theresa issued a decree forbidding the mutilation and burning of corpses. It was a moment when the Enlightenment collided with the old darkness. Science declared the dead could not rise, yet in remote villages the rituals carried on. For many, no decree from Vienna could silence the fear that death was not the end, and that a restless corpse might still stir beneath the earth. To us today, the idea of the living dead might seem unrealistic. However, in the Middle Ages, this and far beyond, this was a real thing, a real fear, and an absolutely terrifying one at that. Imagine standing in a graveyard by torchlight, watching a coffin prized open. Inside, the body looks fresh, the skin stretched, the face still full. In the dim light, it could almost be sleeping. Then there are the other details. Blood darkening the lips, smeared about the mouth as though the corpse had fed. Hair and nails seeming to have grown since burial. The body grotesquely bloated, as if swelling with stolen life. To a medieval villager, these were sure signs of a revenant. Today we thankfully have science to help us out. The truth is far less supernatural, but no less grisly. In cold or dry soil, a corpse can decay slowly, leaving it looking strangely well preserved. The blood at the mouth is purge fluid, the natural leakage that occurs as organs break down. The growth of hair and nails, an illusion, caused by the skin shrinking and retracting. And the bloating, well, that comes from gases building inside the body as it decomposes. None of this was understood centuries ago. To those who exhumed the graves, what they saw convinced them beyond doubt that something unnatural was at work. And so terrified, they reached for the knife, the stake, and the fire, desperate to silence the dead. It's easy for us now to dismiss their fear, but standing in their shoes with no science to explain what you see, can we really say that we would have acted differently? Today, Wharram Percy remains in silence. The cottages are no longer here. The church roof is now gone. But what remains is how deep the fear of the dead once ran. What we've seen is not just local superstition. It is a part of a wider, older dread. The idea that the dead do not always rest quietly. In every culture there was the same fear, that death might not end suffering, but instead unleash it upon the living. We've walked among broken bones, panicked rituals and imperial decrees. We've seen how fear can push a village to desecrate their own dead, and how medicine and science tried to banish the old horrors. And yet, even now the stories cling. They creep from the pages of history into the screens of our cinemas, shaping everything from Dracula to The Walking Dead. And so concludes episode 2 in our season of the dead. We are, of course, getting a little bit closer to Halloween now. Thank you to everybody that's joined me today. What did you all think? And let me ask you a question. If you didn't have the benefit of science behind you, would you also believe, given what you know the villagers thought, that the dead could actually rise? Now, if you have not had enough yet, then feel free to join me next week again, where we will be following behind a ghostly procession to look at the omens of death. Now, I've been Claire. This has been The Wanderless Way. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care, stay curious, stay safe. I'll see you on the next episode. Don't have nightmares.